Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the cultures behind the stories we are about to explore. The tales shared here come from many peoples, lands, and traditions. I do not change these stories to fit modern expectations or to align with today's social standards. Instead, I present them as they were told, sometimes beautiful, sometimes harsh, sometimes challenging. We are not here to judge the past, but to understand it, to listen, to learn, and to honor the ancestors who carried these stories forward. We also share stories from various religious traditions. These are presented in their historical and spiritual context, with respect for their beliefs that they represent. Every culture deserves respect, context, and acknowledgement, and this space is dedicated to doing exactly that. Story 1. Xiangu, the peach of gentle immortality. In the quiet valleys and mist-laced mountains of ancient China, where the boundary between the mortal and the immortal is said to soften like morning fog, there is the story of Xiangu, the only female among the 8 immortals. Her path to transcendence was not marked by conquest, nor by dramatic trials of strength, but by something far more subtle, a gentleness so complete that it became transformative. In her story, nourishment is not excess, pleasure is not indulgence, and beauty is not spectacle, but quiet alignment with the rhythms that sustain life. Xiangu was born into an ordinary life, yet from a young age she showed an unusual sensitivity to the world around her. She moved softly, spoke little, and seemed attuned to something deeper than what could be seen. Where others sought abundance in material form, she was drawn to simplicity, to the small acts that nourished without overwhelming. The inclination would shape her path in ways that were not immediately understood, even by those around her. One night she received a dream, not loud or commanding, but clear in its presence. In this dream, a divine figure appeared and instructed her to eat powdered mica, a mineral believed in Taoist tradition to purify the body and align it to the energies of heaven and earth. This was not presented as a command, but as an invitation, a quiet offering of a path that required trust rather than force. When she awoke, she did not rush, nor did she doubt. She simply began. As she followed this guidance, her relationship with nourishment changed. She no longer sought food in the way others did, no longer consumed for fullness or pleasure alone, but engaged with sustenance as something intentional, something sacred. Over time, it is said that she required less and less, her body becoming lighter, her presence more attuned to the subtle energies that move through the world. This was not deprivation, but refinement, a shift from excess to essence. Her transformation did not isolate her from the world, but deepened her connection to it. She wandered the mountains, gathering herbs not for wealth or recognition, but to offer healing to those she encountered. Her touch was gentle, her presence calming, and those who came to her did not leave overwhelmed, but restored. She did not impose, did not demand, but offered, allowing others to receive in their own way, in their own time. Xiangu is often depicted holding a lotus flower or a peach, both symbols of nourishment and immortality. The lotus, growing from mud into beauty, reflects the ability to rise from the ordinary into something refined. The peach, particularly the peaches of immortality in Chinese myth, represents sustenance that extends life not through quantity but through quality, through alignment with the natural order. In her hands, these symbols are not decorative but functional, reminders that what nourishes us is not always what is most abundant, but what is most attuned. Her immortality did not arrive as a sudden transformation, but as a gradual unfolding. There was no single moment where she became something entirely different, but rather a continuous process of becoming, a slow refinement that allowed her to move beyond the limitations of the physical world. In this way, her story reflects a deeper understanding of transcendence, not as escape, but as deep integration, as the ability to live so gently, so in alignment, that the boundaries between worlds begin to dissolve. For those who honor her story, there is an understanding that pleasure and nourishment are not separate, but intertwined. Yet this pleasure is not loud or overwhelming. It is quiet, deliberate, found in the act of tasting, of breathing, of being present with what is offered. Xiangu teaches that gentleness is not weakness, but a form of strength, that to move softly through the world can create space for life to flourish in ways that force cannot achieve. There is also within her story a recognition that the body is not something to be controlled or denied, but something to be listened to be cared for with intention. Nourishment becomes an active relationship, a dialogue between self and world, where what is taken in is chosen not for excess, but for harmony. In this, her path reflects the Taoist principle of balance, of moving with rather than against the natural flow. Thus, Xiangu stands as a figure of gentle nourishment, a pleasure that sustains rather than overwhelms, a beauty that arises from alignment rather than display. Her story reminds that what we take in, physically, emotionally, spiritually, shapes what we become, and that by choosing with care, by engaging with the world softly, we create the conditions for life to grow, not in bursts, but in steady, enduring ways. In every moment where we slow down, where we taste fully, where we allow ourselves to be nourished without excess, there is her presence. A quiet reminder that gentleness itself is fertile, that what is tended with care will grow, and that life, when approached with softness, unfolds in its own time, in its own way, carrying us with it. Story 2. Demeter, the feast that restores the world. In the golden fields of ancient Greece, where grain bent in the wind like a living sea, there lived Demeter, goddess of the harvest, nourishment, and the quiet sustaining rhythms of life. Her presence was not loud or dramatic, but essential, woven into every meal, every seed, every moment where the earth offered itself to those who depended on it. Through her, nourishment was not merely survival, but a sacred exchange, a relationship between human and land, between effort and reward, between hunger and fulfillment. Demeter's story is often told through loss, through the disappearance of her daughter Persephone, taken into the underworld by Hades. In her grief, Demeter withdrew from her role, and the earth responded. Crops failed, fields went barren, and famine spread across the land. This was not punishment, but reflection. Without nourishment, without the gentle care that sustains life, the world cannot flourish. In this absence, the people came to understand the depth of what Demeter provided, not only food, but continuity, the steady cycle that allows life to endure. When Persephone was eventually returned for part of the year, the earth awakened once more. Crops grew, flowers bloomed, and the cycle of nourishment resumed. Yet this return was not simply a restoration of what had been, but the beginning of something deeper, a recognition of the rhythms that govern life. There would be times of growth and times of rest, times of abundance and times of stillness. Demeter's gift was not endless production, but balance, the understanding that nourishment is part of a cycle that must be honored. From this understanding came rituals, particularly in the Eleusinian mysteries, sacred rites held in honor of Demeter and Persephone. These were not public celebrations, but deep personal experiences, centered around transformation, renewal, and the sacred nature of nourishment. Participants would gather not only to observe, but to engage, to take part in a process that reflected the cycles of life and death, of planting and harvesting, of loss and return. At the heart of these rituals was a simple act, the sharing of food and drink, particularly a mixture called kikeon, made from barley and water, sometimes with herbs. This was not a feast in the sense of excess, but one of intention. After periods of fasting, participants would consume the drink slowly, mindfully, allowing the act of nourishment to become something more than habit. It became awareness, connection, a recognition of what it means to receive sustenance. This act reflects a deeper truth within Demeter's story, that nourishment is not only about what is consumed, but how it is received. To eat without awareness is to miss the relationship, to take without acknowledging the source. But to eat with presence is to engage in a sacred exchange, to recognize that what sustains us comes from processes beyond our control, from the earth, from time, from cycles that continue whether we notice them or not. Demeter's domain is not only the field, but the body itself, the way it receives, processes, and is shaped by what it takes in. In this sense, pleasure becomes part of nourishment, not as indulgence, but as appreciation. The taste of food, the texture, the act of eating, these are not separate from survival, but integral to it. They are reminders that life is meant to be experienced, not rushed through, that even the most basic acts can hold meaning when approached with attention. There is also a gentleness to Demeter's approach. She does not force growth, but nurtures it, creates the conditions in which it can occur. This gentleness is not passive, but active, requiring patience, care, and the willingness to work with natural rhythms rather than against them. It is this quality that allows life to flourish sustainably, not in bursts of abundance followed by depletion, but in steady cycles that can be maintained over time. For those who honored Demeter, there was an understanding that to live well was to live in alignment with these cycles, to take what was needed, to give back what could be returned, to recognize the interconnectedness of all things. The feast was not only a celebration, but a reminder that nourishment is both a gift and a responsibility, that how we engage with it shapes not only our own lives, but the world around us. Thus, Demeter stands as a figure of sacred nourishment, of pleasure that is rooted in presence, of gentleness that allows life to grow. Her story reminds that what we consume becomes part of us, that the act of receiving is as important as what is received. In every meal taken with awareness, in every moment where nourishment is honored rather than rushed, there is her presence, the quiet force that sustains life, not through excess, but through balance. Story 3, The Festival of Roses, when fragrance becomes offering. In the high valleys and gardens of ancient Persia, where mountains cradle fields of blooming color and the air itself can seem to carry memory, there is a tradition that speaks not of grand conquest or divine conflict, but of something far quieter and just as powerful. The cultivation of beauty, fragrance, and gentle pleasure as a sacred act. It is found in the Festival of Roses, a seasonal moment when the land itself exhales sweetness, and people gather not to take from it hastily, but to participate in its unfolding. When the roses begin to bloom, they do not rush into fullness all at once. They open gradually, petal by petal, responding to the warmth of the sun, the moisture of the soil, and the unseen rhythms that guide their growth. Their fragrance is not forced outward, but released naturally, carried by the air, drifting across fields and into the spaces where people live. This fragrance becomes more than scent, it becomes presence, something that can be felt, something that draws attention without demanding it. During the festival, people rise early, before the heat of the day, when the roses are at their most fragrant. They move through the fields with care, gathering petals not in excess, but with intention, understanding that what is taken must be respected. The act of picking is not hurried, but deliberate, each bloom handled gently, each petal recognized as part of something larger. This is not harvesting in the sense of extraction, but participation, a collaboration between human and land. The petals are then used to create rosewater, oils, and perfumes, substances that carry the essence of the flower beyond its physical form. The process of distillation is slow, requiring patience and attention. Heat is applied carefully, steam rises, and over time, the fragrance separates and condenses into something that can be held, something that can be shared. What was once fleeting becomes lasting, yet still retains its subtlety. This transformation reflects a deeper understanding of pleasure and nourishment, that what is most enriching is not always what is consumed quickly, but what is experienced fully. The fragrance of the rose cannot be grasped in the same ways as food or drink, yet it nourishes in its own way, calming the mind, opening the senses, creating a moment of presence. In this, the festival becomes more than a celebration of a flower. It becomes a practice of awareness, of slowing down enough to receive what is being offered. In Persian poetic tradition, the rose is often paired with the nightingale, a bird whose song is said to be inspired by the flower's beauty. The nightingale does not possess the rose, does not consume it, but responds to it, its song becoming an expression of the connection between them. This relationship reflects the idea that pleasure does not always require ownership, that it can exist in the space between, in the act of witnessing, of responding, of allowing oneself to be moved. The gardens themselves are designed to enhance this experience, arranged with pathways, water features, and shaded spaces that invite wandering rather than rushing. Water flows through channels, reflecting light, carrying the scent of the roses, adding another layer to the sensory experience. The garden becomes a place not just of growth, but of encounter, where the senses are engaged in a way that is both gentle and profound. There is also an understanding within this tradition that beauty and pleasure are not separate from the sacred. The act of creating rosewater, of tending the garden, of engaging with fragrance becomes a form of devotion, a way of honoring the world not through austerity, but through appreciation. This does not diminish the spiritual, but deepens it, recognizing that the senses themselves can be pathways to awareness. In this way, the Festival of Roses teaches that gentleness is fertile, that what is approached with care yields more than what is taken by force. The fragrance of the rose cannot be rushed, cannot be intensified through pressure. It must be allowed to unfold in its own time. The same is true for pleasure, of nourishment, of the experiences that sustain us. When approached with patience, they deepen. When rushed, they fade. Thus, this tradition stands as a reflection of the power of softness, of the way beauty, when engaged with fully, can nourish without overwhelming. It reminds that It reminds that not all sustenance comes from what we consume directly, but from what we allow ourselves to experience, to feel, to receive. In every moment where we pause, where we breathe in deeply, where we allow ourselves to be present with what is gentle and fleeting, there is the essence of this festival. Story 4. Fertility Festivals, the gentle rhythm of joyful renewal. In the highlands of Bhutan, where valleys open like quiet bowls between mountains and prayer flags carry intention across the wind, there are festivals that speak not through force or grandeur, but through rhythm, laughter, and gentle celebration. These are fertility festivals, rooted in both Buddhist practice and older folk traditions, where life is honored not only through reverence, but through joy, through the body, through the simple and sacred act of being alive. These gatherings are not centered on urgency or intensity, but on timing, unfolding with the seasons, often aligned with planting cycles, harvests, and the quiet turning of the year. Villagers come together in courtyards, monasteries, and open fields, dressed in vibrant fabrics that mirror the colors of the land. The air is filled with music, with drums and horns that do not overwhelm, but guide, creating a steady pulse that invites participation rather than demands it. At the heart of these festivals is the understanding that fertility is not only about reproduction, but about vitality, about the capacity for life to grow, to renew, to continue. This vitality is expressed through dance, through food, through shared presence. Movements are often circular, rhythmic, repeating patterns that mirror the cycles of nature. There is no rush to reach an end, no emphasis on performance, but rather a focus on the act itself, the experience of moving together, of being in rhythm with others. One of the most well-known aspects of Bhutanese fertility tradition is the influence of Drukpa Kunle, a wandering saint often referred to as the divine madman. His teachings, though unconventional, emphasize the breaking of rigid structures and the embrace of life in its fullness, including its physical and sensual aspects. He used humor, symbolism, and at times explicit imagery to challenge the idea that spirituality must be separate from the body, from pleasure, from the natural expressions of being human. In festivals influenced by his legacy, symbols of fertility are present, not hidden but integrated, reminding participants that creation, life, and continuation are not separate from the body, but emerge through it. Yet these symbols are not treated with vulgarity, but with a kind of openness, a recognition that what is often considered private or restrained is, in fact, part of the sacred cycle of life. In this way, the festivals create a space where the body is not denied, but honored as a vessel of life. Food plays a central role in these gatherings, not in excess, but as shared nourishment. Meals are prepared and eaten together, slowly, with attention, reflecting the understanding that to eat is to participate in the cycle of life, to receive what the land has provided. The flavors, often rich, yet balanced, engage with senses without overwhelming them, encouraging presence rather than distraction. Eating becomes a communal act, a moment of connection, where pleasure is not isolated but shared. There is also an element of blessing within these festivals. Monks and elders offer prayer, chants, and rituals that align with community within the forces that sustain life. These blessings are not separate from the celebration, but woven into it, creating a balance between joy and reverence, between movement and stillness. This integration reflects a worldview where spirituality is not removed from daily life, but embedded within it, present in both quiet reflection and lively expression. The gentleness of these festivities lies in their rhythm. There is no urgency, no pressure to produce or achieve. Instead, there is an invitation to participate, to move, to eat, to be present. This gentleness allows for a different kind of fertility, one that is not forced but allowed, not driven but nurtured. It recognizes that life grows best not under strain, but under care, not through intensity, but through consistency. For those who take part, the experience is not about spectacle, but about alignment with the community, with the land, with the cycles that continue whether or not they are acknowledged. In dancing, in eating, in laughing, participants become part of these cycles, not observers, but contributors, their presence adding to the collective energy that sustains life. Thus, Bhutanese fertility festivals stand as a reflection of pleasure and nourishment as sacred acts, not separate from spirituality, but integral to it. They remind that gentleness itself can be fertile, that what is approached with care, with attention, with joy, has the capacity to grow and continue. In every moment where we allow ourselves to experience life without rushing, where we engage with our senses fully, where we find connection in shared presence, there is the essence of these festivals. Daily thread for May 20th. Gentleness invites life to unfold. What is nourished slowly grows deeply. Pleasure can be a form of presence. Softness creates space for abundance. The body knows how to receive. What is savored becomes sustaining. Life flourishes where care is given. In gentleness, creation continues.